Hello guys, and welcome back to another video on building a PHP MVC framework. In this video, we will start injecting our services into each other and put it into a bean map. And that bean map will essentially be inside a container later on. We will check when we can instantiate a service, and if it has dependencies on other services, those other services need to be built first. So let's start with first making a small change with our injection name. We'll first go to service scanner. And in there we have a method build service injection info. And here we want to make our get injection name optional, so it can be null. So we use a builder here, and the builder builds a service injection info. So in service injection info, we will say that our injection name is a string or null. And of course, in our constructor as well, we need to update our PHP doc. After that, our getter as well is null. Then we need to go to our builder, which also has the injection name as a string, but now it's also nullable, and we need to put in our with injection name as well. Next thing, we can update our get injection name. So we only need the service attribute. We can remove the reflection clause. And this statement is not needed anymore. Well, it is needed, but if the service name is empty, we will just return null instead of the class. And of course, this method can return null as well. And that's it. Why do we want null? Which we'll see when we start building our injector. It's handy to know if it's null or not, and we can go through some steps. That's why it has to be null. Okay. The other thing we need to go is to the get constructor args method. This get constructor args injection in here. We want to check if the constructor arguments are correct. So we will have some checks that we don't allow because it will make injection way too complicated for what we're trying to do. So this will be another class we will be creating in a moment, which will be called service scanner validator, which will be a utility class for us, and we will say validate constructor, type it correctly, parameter type, which will accept the parameter and the class name for good exception messages. So first things first, we'll create it under the scanner namespace. So let's create the class scanner validator. And we go back in here and we can, well, I need to, of course, name it properly, service scanner. We'll refactor it, and we can see that we now can add the method, which is a public static function, which is nice, which will return nothing. It will just validate. What else can we do with this class? This can be a final read only. We don't want to extend this class, and we only want to read some stuff. And we want a private constructor, so we cannot instantiate this class anywhere, and we can only use the static functions on it. So what do we want to do in this function? We want to validate our reflection parameter of our constructor argument. So first, we want to fetch the name of the parameter. So it's parameter get name, and we want the type. That's mainly our validation. So we say get type. First of all, if our type equals null, we say, okay, we want it completely statically typed. We say we don't want this, so we throw a new service scanner exception. The constructor parameter single quotes with the name in class. And then we print out the class. So this needs to be renamed to service class. That's why we need to pass it mainly for the name. We'll say does not have a type. A type is required. So in our framework, we just require types. And that's quite important for us. And then we have one more constraint. If our type is an instance of a reflection union type. So a union type is a type that is, yeah, it consists of multiple types. Or our type is an instance of reflection intersection type, which also supports multiple types. We don't support multiple types for our injection. So we say throw new service scanner exception. The first part we can copy paste. Has multiple types. This is not yet supported because maybe in a later version we can support this one. So what do we check? We check if we have a type and it's a single type. So a type, for example, here like string or int, it will not work because then we don't really know what to inject. And that's our main goal. We want to know what to inject. We can work with multiple types later on, but it makes the code way more complex. And for a first version, for a proof of concept, this will suffice for us. I added some PHP docs there as well. So this method will be called on every constructor argument that's being scanned, which means that every constructor parameter will be validated. We have some yellow squiggly lines, so we will update our PHP docs. Do we have some yellow lines as well? Yes. Add throws, and we're good. Oh no, we missed one here. Add throws, add finding starting directories. I just want to get rid of the warnings, and it's good when we generate some documents from the code that we have them on most methods. We should add them on all, but yeah, sometimes you just forget them. You see here we have a warning because it throws now an exception. We'll add it and then we can continue. Okay. Another thing I've noticed is in our string utils, our isBlank function can fail because sometimes value will be null and empty, yeah, it's deprecated. So we'll say in here, first of all, if value equals null or is empty. So if it's null, we will never get into the second part because it's an or, and then we don't get the deprecation message anymore, which is just a small, yeah, fix. But yeah, deprecation things, remove them as quickly as possible from your code because it can bite you in the butt later on. Good. Next thing, we will start really on our injection part. So we have one main class, and we will put it into the namespace inject. And our main class will be called service creator. Okay. And in the service creator, we will have one public function called create services. We want to accept an array of scanned services, and what do we want to return? A map. But we don't have this type yet, so let's go to our utils. We'll go to our source. We create a new package called structure, and in structure we'll create a class called map, which is basically an array with some helper functions on it. Let's see what we will create. So first of all, we'll add some PHP doc with add template, because it will have some generics. We'll call it v for value. Map implements iterator aggregate and countable. So those are two interfaces we want to implement, and they come from the PHP itself. So let's implement the methods. We need to implement countable. Let's implement it, and let's generate with the do. And for an interface, we don't need to put the override annotation. Okay. What do we want to have as member variables in this class? It's a private array. I will call it elements. And that's it. What this array will be, it will be an array of a string or an int as the key, and it has v as its value. Good. First of all, we will create a constructor. So construct. We accept an array of elements, which is, and we'll give it the diff value of an empty array. And we say elements equals elements. So we'll initialize it to an empty array. After that, we can start implementing our helper functions with this array. So first function is an easy one, is empty, which returns a bool and is just a return of the empty. It's a wrapper of elements. Next up is a public function add all, which accepts an array of elements, which is a void. This array is again a string or an int as a key and p as a value. And what we will do is say elements, is the other one, equals array merge elements $element. So we will merge what we put in this function here into our elements. Oh, I need to say array merge, of course. Merge. Okay. Next up is to add a single item. So we'll call it add string or int. And this is called key. And then we say we have a mixed of value. We'll return a void. We'll add our PHP doc, and this one is v. And it's nothing more than elements. We'll give it the key and override it if it's already existing, and we'll add the value. Nothing more. That's a good start. What's next? We want to check if we already have a key, for example. So we say public function has, which accepts a string or an int, which is a key, and it returns a bool, which is just array key exists on elements. Easy enough. What's it complaining about? Missing array. I'm not sure why it's complaining. Oh yeah, of course. We need to add the key as well. No worries. Okay, add PHP doc. Oh, great. Of course, we want as well to be able to get our items back, not only set them. So function get all, which returns an array, which just returns elements. And PHP-Doc is an array of string or int as the key and v as a value. We want, of course, to have a single item as well. So function get, which will return mixed because it's as well nullable. We'll accept a string or an int as the key. And then we say return elements key null. So if it doesn't find anything, we return null. That's the special operator in PHP. Otherwise, we return the value that we found. Our Java doc is also good. Last but not least, we want to remove as well an element based on the key, which is a void. First, we check if we have the key. So if has the key, we say, okay, unset on elements this key. So this will only do something when the key exists, but it's okay that it not fails if it doesn't exist because we want it gone, and it's basically just gone. It's an extra safety check. The other function is a function to completely clear our map, which is just assigning a new empty array to our elements. Now we want to have our get iterator. We say return new array iterator. And we need to pass in our elements. Import it, and we're good. And our count is really simple. We just say we count our elements. Okay, it put this count. That's okay. So that's our map. It's basically just helper functions around an array. And that's what this one will return. So you see here, we can import our structure map. So this is the heart of our service injection. First things first, we want to create a bean map. So every service we create and instantiate through here will be a bean. So we'll say new map. And that's also what we want to return. So bean map. We also want to have an array cached dependencies. Because we're going to look for dependencies a lot for every service, but we don't instantiate the service at the moment, and we want to look at the dependencies again if they're all resolved. We don't want to always loop over it again and again and again to get the same result. So we cache those results once in cache dependencies. So it's a bit of a performance gain. Then we'll have a private function create bean map. We will send the scan services. we will send the bean map and the cached dependencies. So our function, private function, create bean map, will have an array of scan services. We will accept as a reference our bean map. So we'll know if we change our bean map, it's really on the first one. So we only use that one. And then we want to do the same with the cache dependencies. And what do we return? We return nothing, because all our actions will be on the bean map itself, because we pass it as a reference. So we only create it once, and we can just, yeah, keep using that object. Okay. So scan services are service injection info array. Our map is a string and bean. I will create a bean in a minute. And our cache dependencies is an array string and string. Good. We'll create a bean when we really want the bean to be created. It's a helper class, and it will be quite clear once we are getting into that part of the code. So what do we want to do? First things we want to do is, we want to loop over all our scanned services. So scanned services as e, and we want scan service. First things first, we want the dependencies for this service. So dependencies equals this get dependencies. What do we pass in? Our scanned service, so not all of them again. Our bean map, sorry, our cache, so our cached dependencies, and all our scanned services as well. Okay. So how are we going to see what are dependencies on this service? We'll start with adding the method. We'll add our PHP doc. So this one is a string, and this is an array of service injection info. What do we want to do first? So, like I said, we are using our cache dependencies. This also needs to be passed by reference, so let's add it as well. We use it to have a performance gain, so we don't want to loop every time. So first things we do is, do we have it in our cache dependency? So we say array key exists. Key exists. Can't type today. We'll have the scan service get class get name. And in what array do we want to check? In our cache dependencies, of course. If this exists, we say we return from our cache dependencies with the service class name, which will be unique. We return an array. So if we find it in our dependencies, we return it. And what are we returning? We are returning an array of string as well. Otherwise, we want to we need to scan for our dependencies. So we say dependencies I can't really type today. Our dependencies is an empty array for now. we want to loop. Over what do we want to loop? So what are dependencies? It's what we need to inject in our constructor. So from our scan service, we want to get the constructor arguments as a constructor arg. Good. If the constructor arg get type equals a property, we can just continue because it's not a dependency, it's not another service, so it cannot be dependency. If this scanned services contains service, so we want to check if our constructor arg service is contained inside the scan services. If it is, we say dependencies, we'll add it, and we'll say constructor arg get parameter, get type, and we know that we can use get name because we have our validator over there, and then we add it. So we return array of strings and not an array and string. So put it like this. After the for each, we have all our dependencies for this service. We of course want to add it first to our cached dependencies, and we'll add it based on the class name. So scan service, get class name equals dependencies. And then we'll also return our dependencies as well. Great. So now we found our dependency. So the magic of this function really lies into scanned services contains service. So it checks if it contains this service or not, and then it's a dependency. So let's add this method now. Which has a constructor injection argument. We'll import it, and it has a array of scanned services, which will return a bool, of course. Let's add it, and this one is service injection info. So what do we need to do first? We need to get the type. So we say type equals, let's call this a short name called arg. Of course, we need to update our PHP doc. So arg, we get the reflection parameter, and get the name, get the type, sorry, and then we have our type. If, and it's just a security measure, if we use this class wrong, so say type is not an instance of reflection named type, so it's the single one, the single type, then we say, okay, return false. It cannot be a dependency because it has multiple types. It should be checked in the scanner, but if you use it this class, otherwise, then we'll have that check for us. Then we say type get name equals, sorry, that's in our side over free. So for each, we'll say scan services as scan service. When do we want to return true? So if our name equals the scan service get injection name, we want to return true. And when do we also want to return true? If, and I see I made a mistake, it's get class, get name, sorry. We want to return true. So if our argument has a qualifier, and we need to add that function, has qualifier, it's an easy function, and our argument get qualifier equals our scan service get injection name, we also want to return true. Okay. So if it has a qualifier, we get the qualifier and check if it's the same as the injection name. Then we return true. It's important the has qualifier because if both are null, we don't want to check this one. Then otherwise we get the name of the type, and then it's a class name, and then we want to check the class name as well. And if we don't find anything, we say return false. Okay, so the has qualifier is a quite easy method. We need to add in our construction injection arc, which is a bool, and it just returns that the qualifier not equals null. That's it. Nothing more. That's what the has qualifier does. And now we have all our dependencies. So what's up next? Once we have the dependencies, we need to check if, and it's again a new method, are all dependencies resolved. So are all other services that this service relates to, well, depends on instantiated. So we'll say a bean map and say get all, and we'll add a new method as well, keys. So we need to go into our map. We have here a get all. We'll also create a public function get all keys, which will return array, and this returns array underscore keys of elements, and that gets all the keys, which is a string array or an int array. Okay. So we want all our keys, and we want to pass in the dependency. So our keys will basically be class names. Let's first create this method, because this is the last private method in this class, and then we really can start instantiating our services. So private function are all dependencies resolved, array being class names, and an array of dependencies, which of course will return a bool again. So we'll loop over our dependencies because that will be in the end most of the time the smallest array. So we'll have a found, which is false. Then we have another for each. We need to loop over all our bean class names. So all bean class names are all services that are already created. We'll call it class. If our class equals our dependency, we say found equals true, and we break out of this for each, and we check now if found is false, means there is a dependency not resolved, we return false. If it loops over everything correctly, this method will return true and all our dependencies are resolved. Good. Now, how will we instantiate it? So we will have a new variable created bean, and we will have a new class called service factory, and this has a public static method create bean. What does this accept? A scan service and a bean map. That's all it needs. After that, and this will be the bean object that we'll create in a bit, the created bean. We need to add it to the bean map. So what do? We say bean map add with what key? It's a scan service, get class, get name, and the created bean in it. After that, it's really important we unset from scan services our key, because we only stop in this method once our scan services are empty. And that's under the for each if it's not empty, scan services, then we say this create bean map with scan services, but there can be services that are already gone with the bean map and the cache dependencies, of course. We'll add a small to do on 255 times in this function quit with an exception. If we loop 250 times in this function, it means that we somewhere have a circular dependency, and it means that we need to check on how we are instantiating our services. So what do we need to do now is we need to have a bean class. So let's create the class as well in the inject namespace. What does this bean have? It's also a read-only class, which has a private string attribute type. So we know that we can extend the service, and we want that type class name saved in our bean. It has a private string or null injection name. It has a private bool is primary, or if there are multiple services defined with the same interface, for example. And of course, an object, which is the service. So yeah, we want really the service is the object we are going to get from the container. So let's generate a constructor, and I want attribute type after is primary. It's a bit clearer. We want the long format, and now we want to generate the getters as well, and again the long format. This suggestion is from PHP Hammer. It's a great plugin for IntelliJ or PHP Storm. So that's our bean class at the moment. Now, for the injection, that's to create a bean, we have a service factory. Let's create a class. It's a final read-only again, so it will have a private constructor. Done. And of course, we have the method create bean. Add that method. So we of course want to import it and not have it in our function type. I have a map. We'll say bean. Okay, great. So this function returns a bean. We'll have a big try and a catch. I will catch reflection exception. Call it A. We'll handle it a bit later. First, what do we want to do? So we want to have an empty array called constructor args equals that. So we need to create our constructor argument. So for each injection info is called scan service, get constructor injection argument as arg, let's say. So constructor arguments will add with a new function. It's a private function, resolve constructor arg. What do we pass in? We pass in our constructor argument, of course, our bean map because we need to fetch it, and we'll pass in our scan service class name as well to have some better exception exception handling. So important method is here. So we'll add it now. First things first, import the model. And what does this return? It returns mixed. This is the service class name. Okay, first things we want to check is our type. So our argument, get type, is it a property or not? So if it's a property, at the moment we'll not start implementing it yet because this video is already quite long. We'll say implement property handling because we will need to have a config loader and stuff for this one, which is quite big as well. So we'll just check it and return it. Otherwise, we have a bean and we'll say self resolve bean. What do we want to have? We want our argument, our bean map, and our service class name. Okay. Let's add the methods. And what will it return? Again, a mixed. So our goal is to return something we can inject in our bean to create. So for each, we'll say bean map get all as bean class name, because that's the key, and then we have a bean which is a string, and this one is a bean. So IntelliJ knows how to autocomplete for us. First, we want to have a check if our argument has a qualifier and our bean has an injection name and, well, not equals null, and our bean get injection name equals our arg get qualifier. Then we say, okay, return from my bean my service. Otherwise, if our argument get parameter we'll need it multiple times, so we'll create a new function for it. Parameter class name equals the bean class name. Then we also can inject our service. So we'll say bean get service. What is this method? It will return a string, and it's nothing more than returning from our parameter. We'll get the type, get type, and then we get the name, and that will give the parameter class name. So this is when we find the bean and it's really injected. But there are also possibilities we don't have it yet, but we can have default values. So first we check if our constructor argument has a default value. And it's another method we wanna create. Then we say our constructor, our argument, get parameter, get default value. If our argument or constructor argument allows null. Another one we will create in a moment will return null. Then we need to create our exceptions. So let's add first the has default value. So it's an easy one. It's again on the parameter. Now we say get default default value available. We also have a public function allows null, which is a return of our parameter allows null or our parameter, the type of it. Does the type allow null? Also quite important. And of course, those two return bools. Last thing is, okay, if it doesn't allow null, it doesn't have a default value. Yeah, we cannot inject it. We need to throw an exception. And we already created a service scanner exception. We will copy and paste this class and call it bean creation exception. And that's it. That's what the class does. That's it. After that, we have a check again if our argument has a qualifier, because we want another message for it. So we say throw new bean creation exception, cannot inject bean with the name. And then we have our argument get qualifier into. Now we say our service class name. That's why we passed it. And then we give it some extra info. Did you specify a service with this name? You can put it, well, I'll put it like this. That's enough info. We'll copy paste this. Here we have an else. What do we want to say here? So with the type, then we get the parameter class name into did you specify a service attribute on this type? And that's it. So what do? We check our beans, we check if it's default value, null, and then the qualifier or not. Let's add the PHP docs so we don't have any warnings anymore. Okay. Then, when we have our constructor arguments, what do we need to do is we want to create our object. And we will check if our constructor args are empty, because that's important with how reflections is implemented in PHP. So we can say scan service .get class new instance without anything if it's empty. Otherwise, we can say scan service get class new instance as well, but we pass in our constructor arguments and we have our object. The last thing what we need to do is return a new bean. We have our scan service get injection name. Our scan service is primary. We have our scan service get service attribute class name, and we have our object, of course, which is the most important one. And we as well, because the new instance can throw a reflection exception, we say we throw a new bean creation exception called a reflection exception that is unrecoverable. We'll add the message as well. So e get message, code is still 0 for us, and we'll add e. And that's it. And that creates our bean, and that's we'll need to add throw tag. We'll return our create bean, and then it will be added to our bean mob. So now we want to see it, of course, in action. So let's go to our example usage, and we'll go to public and our index.php file, and let's update that one. So first things first, I want to add more reporting on my browser window itself. So error underscore reporting. We'll put e all, so we see all our issues. We'll do another ini set display errors will be 1. Okay, so we still need to do our scan, but of course we don't need to do our for each. After our scan, what do we need to do? We need a service creator equals new service creator. And again, our kernel will handle all those things later on, but for now, to test it out, it's good to do it ourselves. We want our bean mob, so we see service creator, create services of our scan services. We want to dump our bean mob, just to be sure. And then we want to loop over our bean mob. So we'll call this one class name. And of course, we want the bean as well. Then we want to print out some info. So echo bean. Oh, like this. And we var dump the bean. Let's dump the class name. And last but not least, the object. So that's bean get service. Should go to bean. We can add, of course, the vars. But is it needed? I don't think so. But we'll just do what we need. We first want to check our services. So service 1 has nothing. That's okay. And in here, we want to instantiate. We want to make sure that it's initialized. So we'll put private everywhere. And let's see what this does in our browser now. So let's go to our browser, and of course, an error. So what does this one say? In up services 2, argument 1 must be of type service 1 array given online 14. And I already know what mistake we made. In our service factory, we pass in the array completely, but we need to use the spread annotation as well. Okay, let's try it again. And it instantiates fully. Good. So you can see our bean mob has 3 services, subfolder service 1, and service 2. Then we loop over all those things. So for let's take service 2. For service 2, you can see the bean, and it has here an object of service 2, which is has some values. It's not primary, It has no injection name. Good, good. And we can see in the object that it injects our service1 and our service subfolder service1 as well. And we can see that our default values are injected and our null values, our properties is an empty string because we did not implement it yet. The only thing I still want to try is on service1, let's put in our is primary. So the primary. Let's run it again. We'll search service1 here. So we see our injection name that we passed in, and the is primary is true, so this works as well. So that's how we can do basic service injection. We still, as you saw in the to-dos, we need to do some small things, but that's how we can handle it. And I hope you guys have enjoyed watching this and been learning a lot. And I hope to see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.